Some places on Earth don't look like they belong to this planet at all, not because of filters or digital manipulation, but because the geology, the climate, and millions of years of isolation produced landscapes so extreme that even photographs of them feel fake. These are real locations that scientists have studied, explorers have documented, and satellite imagery has confirmed. And yet most people still struggle to believe they exist. The terrain itself seems to reject the idea that ordinary human beings could stumble across them, live near them, or even stand inside them without questioning what they're looking at. Take Socotra, a remote island sitting in the Arabian Sea off the coast of Yemen. It looks less like a place on Earth and more like something pulled from a science fiction novel. The island's most iconic feature is the dragon blood tree, a species that grows nowhere else on the planet in the way it grows here. Its canopy spreads outward in a dense flat umbrella shape, almost as if it were designed by an architect rather than grown by nature. The trunk below it is thick and pale, almost ghostly, and when the bark is cut it bleeds a deep red resin that gave the tree its name. Socotra's isolation in the Arabian Sea meant that its ecosystem evolved almost completely cut off from the rest of the world for millions of years. Around a third of its plant species exist nowhere else on Earth. For centuries it was known only to sailors and traders who passed through the region, and even today reaching it requires navigating both geography and political instability. The island feels hidden, not just because of its distance, but because the world it contains seems to follow different rules entirely. Then there is Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia, a place that breaks your sense of reality in a completely different way. At over 10,000 square kilometers, it is the largest salt flat on the planet, sitting high in the Andes at an elevation where the air is thin and the light hits the ground with an unfiltered intensity. For much of the year it looks like an endless white desert, cracked into geometric hexagonal patterns stretching all the way to the horizon. But during the rainy season, a thin layer of water floods across the surface, and something extraordinary happens. The water is shallow enough that it becomes a near-perfect mirror. The sky above reflects so completely in the flat below that the horizon disappears. Clouds, mountain peaks, and travellers walking across the surface all appear to float in an endless void where up and down become meaningless. For centuries this region was known mainly to the indigenous communities who lived nearby, and to the miners who came for its mineral deposits. The outside world simply had no reason to look that far into the Andes. Even when it was eventually documented and explored more widely, the photographs were so disorienting that many people assumed they were edited. The landscape itself resists easy belief. High in the Gansu province of China, the Zhangye Danxia landforms present yet another version of impossible. These are mountains, but they look nothing like what most people picture when they hear that word. Their surfaces are striped in deep reds, bright oranges, pale yellows, and muted purples, layered in bands that run horizontally across the rock face like paint applied by a careful hand. The colours come from mineral deposits and sedimentary rock that built up over 24 million years, compressed into layers and then slowly pushed upward and eroded by wind and rain into the shapes they hold today. There was no single dramatic event that created them, just time, pressure, and the slow work of geological processes stacking colour on top of colour, until the result looked more like abstract art than mountainside. The area remained largely outside international awareness until the 2000s, when photographs began circulating online and were almost universally assumed to be heavily edited. Many people still believe they are, but the colours are real, the layering is real, and the mountains stand there regardless of whether anyone believes in them. Perhaps the most hidden of all these places is one that most people will never see in person, not because of distance, but because of the sheer physical hostility of reaching it. The Cave of Crystals in Mexico, discovered by miners drilling beneath the Chihuahuan Desert in the year 2000, contains some of the largest natural crystals ever found anywhere on Earth. Selenite beams growing up to 12 meters long fill a cavern that sits nearly 300 meters underground, heated by magma below to temperatures that hover around 50 degrees Celsius with nearly 100% humidity. Without a specialized cooling suit, a person inside the cave would suffer serious heat injury within minutes. The crystals formed over hundreds of thousands of years as mineral-rich groundwater slowly deposited selenite in conditions that stayed almost perfectly stable across geological time. When miners accidentally broke through the cavern wall, they entered a world that had been sealed off and undisturbed for an almost incomprehensible span of time. It was hidden not behind a mountain range or an ocean, but beneath the ordinary-looking desert surface, invisible until the exact moment human machinery happened to cut through to it. What all of these places share is the same essential story. They stayed unknown or unbelievable to outsiders because their existence seemed to contradict what most people understood the world to be capable of producing. A tree that bleeds red, a flat that holds the sky, mountains painted in colour, a crystal cathedral buried under desert heat. The Earth kept these things hidden inside its most extreme conditions, and in many cases it still does. They are not myths or digital creations. They are simply what happens when the planet is left to work undisturbed for long enough, in places remote or hostile enough that very few people ever thought to look. But isolation doesn't always announce itself through strangeness. Some of the most hidden places on Earth look almost ordinary in photographs, or at least comprehensible, until you understand the systems working beneath the surface or the sheer scale of what you're actually looking at. These are places concealed not just by remoteness or hostile terrain, but by the limits of the human vantage point itself. You can stand near them, fly over them, or drill accidentally into their edges and still not fully understand what you've found. The Earth has a way of hiding things in plain sight, and in ways that only become visible when you step far enough back, or far enough down, to see the whole picture. Mount Roraima sits at the point where Venezuela, Brazil and Guyana meet, and it rises from the surrounding jungle as something that looks like it has been cut clean with a blade. The summit is a vast flat plateau surrounded on all sides by vertical cliffs that drop nearly a kilometre straight down. Those cliffs aren't just dramatic geography. They are the reason the top of that mountain contains life that evolved in almost total isolation for millions of years. Rain falls on the plateau and cannot drain away easily, so the summit is a world of mist, cold water and stone, and the species that adapted to it had no reason to move anywhere else, and nowhere to go even if they did. Around a third of the plant species found on the plateau grow nowhere else on the planet. Carnivorous plants trap insects in pools because the nutrients they need are washed away by constant rain. The rock itself is among the oldest exposed geology on Earth, dating back nearly 2 billion years. For the indigenous Pemon people, Roraima was a sacred place, the stump of a world tree. For everyone else, it was effectively unreachable until the first recorded European ascent in 1884. The sheer cliffs didn't just make it difficult to reach. They preserved an entire ancient world above the clouds, untouched and evolving on its own terms for longer than the human mind can easily hold. The Risha structure in Mauritania presents a completely different kind of invisibility. From the ground, it looks like a series of rocky ridges and eroded hills in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Nothing about it suggests anything unusual to someone walking through it, but from space, the shape becomes impossible to ignore. A series of concentric rings nearly 50 kilometers across, so geometrically striking that early astronauts used it as a landmark for navigation. The structure is so large that its full form simply cannot be perceived from ground level. Its true nature was hidden not by distance or terrain, but by scale. Humans weren't standing in the wrong place to see it. They were standing far too close. Antarctica's blood falls offer a different kind of concealment entirely. On the surface, they appear as a rust-red stain bleeding from the ice of Taylor Glacier into the frozen landscape around it. The colour is dramatic and unsettling, which is partly why it draws attention. But the more remarkable thing is what's happening beneath the ice. A reservoir of ancient salt water, sealed beneath the glacier for somewhere between 1 and 5 million years, contains iron that oxidizes when it finally meets the air at the surface and turns the water the colour it has. The water inside that sealed system is so salty it never freezes despite temperatures well below zero. It contains microbes that have been surviving in darkness and isolation for an almost incomprehensible length of time, cut off from sunlight and oxygen and any contact with the surface world. Bloodfalls isn't just visually striking, it's a window into a biological system that has been running in secret beneath kilometers of ice since before modern humans existed. Hang Son Doong in Vietnam is the largest known cave on Earth, and it is large in a way that breaks normal comparisons. A Boeing 747 could fly through its main passage. Inside, the cave is large enough to contain its own weather system, with clouds forming near the ceiling when conditions are right. It has its own jungle, growing in sections where the ceiling has collapsed and sunlight reaches the floor. The jungle inside the cave has its own ecosystem, its own species adapted to living in partial light beneath hundreds of meters of rock. The cave was known to a local man who found its entrance in 1991 but couldn't explore it because of the wind and sound coming from inside. It wasn't fully explored until 2009. What had been sitting beneath the Vietnamese jungle for millions of years simply waited, sealed behind an opening most people had no reason to approach. What connects all of these places is something the whole planet seems to keep demonstrating whenever humans look carefully enough. Earth is not fully mapped, fully known, or fully understood. The most remote cliff face, the ancient sealed reservoir, the cavern too large to comprehend from inside it, the mountain whose summit has been isolated longer than our species has existed. These aren't relics of a less explored era. They are proof that the planet is still holding things back. Most of us will live our entire lives without standing in any of these places, but knowing they exist changes something about how the world feels. If you found this worth thinking about, share it with someone who still believes the whole Earth has been discovered. And if there's a hidden place we didn't cover that you think belongs on this list, leave it in the comments. The map is never as finished as we think.